Captain Jake Morrison stood at the bridge window of the Terra Nova and watched the stars shine like tiny diamonds against the black space. His ship was moving through the Zeta Reticuli system, far from Earth and farther than any human had ever traveled before. The Terra Nova was not a big ship, but it was built for long trips into deep space. It had everything the crew needed to study new worlds and maybe find signs of life beyond. Earth. Jake had been the captain for 3 years now, and he loved his job. The crew was small but good at what they did. There was Dr. Amy Chen, who studied alien life, Pete Rodriguez, who kept the engines running, Lisa Park, who handled all the talking with Earth, and Carl Blake, who made sure they went to the right places. 8 other people worked on the ship too, all of them excited to be part of humanity's first real trip to another star system. The mission was simple enough. They would look at the planets around the star, take pictures, collect data, and maybe land on a few worlds if they looked safe. Earth wanted to know what was out there, and the Terra Nova was built to find answers. So far they had been in space for 6 months, and everything was going well. Amy was in her lab looking at rock samples from a small moon they had visited last week. She hoped to find tiny life forms in the rocks, but so far had found nothing. Pete was in the engine room making sure all the systems worked perfectly. Lisa was at her station sending reports back to Earth, though the messages would take years to reach home. Carl was checking their path to the next planet they wanted to visit. Jake walked around the ship and talked to his crew. He liked to know how everyone was doing and what they were thinking about. The trip was long, and being so far from home could make people feel sad or worried. But his crew was strong, and they all believed in what they were doing. The Terra Nova had been flying for 2 days toward a blue and green planet that looked like it might have water when something strange happened. Lisa looked up from her station with a confused look on her face. She said the ship's computers were picking up something big moving toward them. Very big. Jake rushed to the bridge and looked at the screens. There was indeed something coming their way, but it was not like anything they had ever seen. The object was huge, much bigger than their ship, and it was moving fast. It did not look like any ship that humans had ever built. Its shape was wrong, and it seemed to be made of materials that reflected light in a strange way. Pete came running to the bridge and said all their systems were acting weird. The engines were still working, but something was interfering with their electronics. Amy joined them and stared at the screens with wide eyes. She had dreamed of finding alien life, but she had thought it would be tiny creatures in rocks, not giant ships in space. That the alien ship got closer, and Jake could see it was not just big but beautiful in a scary way. It had curves and points that did not make sense and colors that seemed to change as he watched. Parts of it glowed with light that hurt to look at directly. The ship was at least 10 times bigger than the Terra Nova, and it moved like it was alive. Jake tried to contact the alien ship using radio but got no answer. He tried different frequencies and different signals, but nothing worked. The alien ship just kept coming closer until it was right next to them. Then something incredible happened. A beam of light shot out from the alien ship and wrapped around the Terra Nova like a giant hand. The crew felt their ship shake and heard metal groaning under stress. The lights flickered and some of the computers stopped working. Jake tried to use the engines to break free, but nothing happened. They were trapped in the alien ship's beam and being pulled toward an opening in its side. Carl said their navigation systems were going crazy and showing readings that made no sense. Lisa tried to send an emergency message to Earth, but her equipment would not work. Pete ran back to the engine room to try to get more power, but the alien beam was too strong. As the Terra Nova was pulled into the alien ship, Jake looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also excitement. They were about to become the first humans to meet real aliens. He told everyone to stay calm and be ready for anything. None of them knew what would happen next, but they were about to find out. The Terra Nova disappeared into the giant alien ship and the opening closed behind them. Far away, Earth continued to spin around its sun, not knowing that humanity had just made contact with something from the stars. The crew of the Terra Nova was now in the hands of beings they could not understand, about to begin an adventure that would change everything they thought they knew about life in the universe. The Terra Nova sat inside a huge chamber that was bigger than any building Jake had ever seen on Earth. Strange lights moved along the walls, and the air felt thick and warm. Everything around them looked like it was made from some kind of crystal that glowed with its own light. The crew stood at the windows of their ship and stared at the alien technology that surrounded them. Suddenly the air near their ship began to shimmer and shapes started to appear. The aliens were tall, much taller than humans, and they looked like giant insects that could walk on 2 legs. Their bodies were covered in hard shells that were dark green and black. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their heads were strange, with big eyes that looked like they were made of many small pieces stuck together. When they moved, their feet made clicking sounds on the crystal floor, that there were many of them, maybe 20 or 30. And they all carried weapons that looked like they shot energy instead of bullets. They moved in a way that seemed planned, like soldiers who had done this many times before. Some of them were bigger than others and wore different colored markings on their shells. Jake could tell that some were leaders and others were followers. The biggest alien stepped forward and made sounds that were like clicking and buzzing mixed together. Other aliens joined in, and soon the air was full of strange noises that the humans could not understand. But there was something else happening too. Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach, and his hands started to shake a little. It was like being afraid, but he did not know why. Amy noticed it too and grabbed Pete's arm. She whispered that she felt scared even though she could not think of a good reason. Lisa said her heart was beating fast, and Carl looked pale. The alien sounds were doing something to their minds, making them feel fear that came from nowhere. One of the aliens pointed a device at their ship and the door opened by itself. Jake tried to close it, but the controls would not work. The aliens made more clicking sounds and the fear feeling got stronger. Some of the crew members stepped back from the door, and Pete said maybe they should try to hide somewhere in the ship, but Jake knew hiding would not work. He was the captain and he had to take care of his crew. He told everyone to stay together and not to show how scared they felt. The aliens seemed to want them to be afraid, and maybe if they acted brave, things would go better. The aliens came onto the Terra Nova, and they were even more frightening up close. Their eyes glowed with light that changed colors, and when they breathed, it sounded like wind blowing through broken glass. They pointed their weapons at the humans and made more clicking sounds. The fear feeling got so strong that Lisa started to cry and Carl sat down on the floor. Jake forced himself to step forward and hold up his hands to show he was not dangerous. He spoke slowly and clearly, saying that they came in peace and wanted to be friends. The aliens stopped making noise and looked at him with their strange eyes. For a moment everything was quiet except for the sound of the ship's air system. Then one of the aliens, one with gold markings on its shell, pointed a different device at Jake. A voice came out of it, speaking in English, but with a flat tone like a computer. The voice said that humans were now prisoners of the Kethmari and would be taken for questioning. It said that resistance would result in pain and that cooperation might result in a quick death. The alien with the gold markings seemed to be the leader. It was bigger than the others and moved with confidence. When it spoke through its device, the other aliens stood very still and quiet. Jake realized this was probably his only chance to make contact and maybe save his crew. He asked the alien leader what the Kethmari wanted and why they had captured the Terra Nova. The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was cold and mean. The voice device said that all species must serve the Kethmari, and that humans would learn their place in the order of things. Amy stepped forward and asked about Kethmari culture and science. She seemed less afraid than the others and more curious. The alien leader looked at her with its glowing eyes, and the fear feeling got stronger again. But Amy kept asking questions about how their technology worked, and what their homeworld was like. This seemed to confuse the aliens. They made clicking sounds to each other, and their eyes flickered in different patterns. Jake got the feeling that most species they captured did not ask questions or show interest in learning about them. Maybe fear was supposed to make people too scared to think clearly. The alien leader pointed its weapon at Amy and made a loud buzzing sound. The voice device said that questions were not allowed and that prisoners must only listen and obey. But Amy just nodded and said that she understood, then asked if the Kethmari had always been space travelers or if they had learned it from someone else. More aliens appeared, and they put strange metal bands around the humans' wrists. The bands felt warm and made a humming sound. Jake tried to pull his off, but it would not move. The alien leader said through its device that the bands would cause pain if the humans tried to escape or fight back. The crew was marched off their ship and through the crystal chamber. Everything around them was huge and strange and beautiful in a scary way. The walls had patterns that seemed to move and change as they walked by. Strange machines made sounds like music, but sad and lonely. Jake wondered how long the Keth had been building ships like this and how many other species they had captured. They were taken to another part of the alien ship, where there were many small rooms with clear walls. Jake could see other creatures in some of the rooms, beings that looked nothing like humans or like the Kethmari. Some looked like they had given up hope and just sat staring at nothing. Others paced back and forth like caged animals. The humans were split up and put in different rooms. Jake found himself alone in a space that was clean but cold. There was a bed and a place to sit, but nothing else. The walls were clear on one side so he could see the hallway where aliens walked back and forth. He wondered what would happen next and if he would ever see his crew again. Jake had been in the clear room for what felt like hours when the alien leader came to get him. The creature with gold markings on its shell stood outside his door and made clicking sounds. The door opened by itself and 2 other aliens came in to escort him. They did not touch him, but their weapons were ready, and the fear feeling came back stronger than before. He was taken through long hallways, filled with more strange crystal technology. The walls showed moving pictures of space, battles and conquered worlds. Jake saw ships being destroyed and cities burning while Kethmari soldiers marched through the ruins. It was clear that these aliens had been conquering other species for a very long time. They brought him to a large room with a high ceiling that sparkled with lights. The room was designed to make anyone inside feel small and helpless. In the center was a platform where the alien leader waited for him. Around the edges of the room, more Kethmari stood in rows like an audience watching a show. The alien leader was even more frightening in this place. Its shell seemed to glow with power, and its 4 arms moved in patterns that made Jake feel dizzy when it spoke through its translation device. The voice echoed around the room and seemed to come from everywhere. At once, the alien said its name was War Commander Zixtel, and that Jake was now standing in a judgment chamber where many species had learned to fear the Keth. It said that resistance was useless and that Jake would tell them everything about human military strength, how many colonies they had, and what weapons they possessed. Jake looked around the room and had to admit it was impressive. The crystal walls amplified every sound, and the lights created shadows that moved in disturbing ways. He could feel the fear trying to take control of his mind again, but he fought against it. He was a starship captain, and he had been trained to stay calm in dangerous situations. Instead of showing fear, Jake asked Zixtel about the crystal technology and how the Kethmari had learned to build such amazing ships. He wanted to know how long their civilization had existed and whether they had always been warriors, or if they had once been peaceful explorers like humans. That this was clearly not the response Zixtel expected. The alien leader's eyes flickered through different colors, and it made harsh clicking sounds. The other Kethmari in the room shifted nervously, and some of them clicked back in what seemed like confusion. Zixtel increased the fear effects, and the room filled with sounds that made Jake's bones ache. But instead of becoming more afraid, Jake found himself becoming more curious. He asked how the fear technology worked and whether it was based on sound waves or some kind of telepathic ability. He complimented the engineering and said his crew would be fascinated to learn about it. The alien leader was becoming frustrated. It waved its 4 arms and made the lights in the room flash in patterns that should have caused terror in any normal prisoner, but Jake just watched with interest and asked if the light patterns had meaning or if they were just designed to look scary. Other Kethmari began entering the room to see what was happening. Word was spreading through the ship that the human prisoner was not responding correctly to their interrogation methods. Some of the younger aliens had never seen a species that did not break down in fear when faced with their technologies, decided to try a different approach. It began telling Jake about the mighty Kethmari Empire and how they had conquered 17 star systems. It described battles where entire fleets had surrendered rather than face their power. It talked about how no species had ever successfully resisted them, and how human civilization would soon be just another part of their empire. But as Zixtel spoke, Jake began to notice something funny about the situation. The alien was clearly very proud of its achievements and wanted Jake to be impressed. It reminded him of kids on Earth who bragged about their video game scores or how tough they were. The way Zixtel gestured with all 4 arms and made its eyes flash seemed almost theatrical. Jake listened politely to the whole speech about Kethmari's superiority and their unstoppable war machine. When the alien leader finished and demanded to know if Jake understood how hopeless his situation was, Jake nodded thoughtfully. He said it sounded like the Kethmari had built a very successful civilization and he could see why they were proud of it. This response made Zixtel even more frustrated. The alien began pacing around the platform and making louder clicking sounds. It demanded to know why Jake was not afraid and what kind of warrior training humans had that made them immune to fear. Jake tried to explain that he was not a warrior at all, just a scientist and explorer who wanted to learn about the universe. He said humans were naturally curious and that even scary situations were interesting if you looked at them the right way. Most humans would rather understand something than be afraid of it. The concept seemed to be completely alien to Zig. The creature stopped pacing and stared at Jake with its compound eyes. It asked through its translator why any species would choose curiosity over proper submission to superior force. This question seemed to genuinely puzzle the alien leader. Jake thought about how to answer. He said that humans had learned long ago that understanding things made them less scary and more manageable. Fear was useful for avoiding immediate danger, but curiosity was better for solving problems and making progress. He added that the Kethmari themselves must be curious, or they would never have developed such advanced technology. This comment seemed to hit something important. Zixtel made a sound that the translator could not interpret, and several other aliens clicked in response. Jake got the impression that he had said something that made them uncomfortable, but he was not sure what it was. The alien leader decided to escalate things. It announced that since Jake would not cooperate voluntarily, he would be taken to the execution chamber where he would watch other prisoners die until he decided to talk. It said that humans might not fear for themselves, but they would surely fear for their companions. Jake felt a real chill at this threat, but he tried not to show it. He asked if he could see his crew first to make sure they were being treated well. Zixtel made what might have been a laugh and said that Jake would see them soon enough, just before they were killed, as an example to him. The execution chamber was even more impressive than the interrogation room. It was a huge space with crystal walls that rose up like a cathedral made of light. The floor was polished, smooth, and reflected everything like a mirror. In the center stood a platform with metal restraints, and above it hung a weapon that looked like it could turn anything into dust in seconds. Jake was brought into the chamber, surrounded by dozens of Kethmari warriors. They arranged themselves in perfect rows around the room like they were attending a ceremony. Their shells gleamed in the crystal light, and their eyes glowed with anticipation. This was clearly something they had done many times before, and they expected it to go exactly the same way as always. Zixtel stood on a raised platform where he could see everything and be seen by everyone. His forearms were spread wide in a gesture of power, and his translator device was turned up loud so his voice filled the entire space. He began speaking about the price of defying the Kethmari and how all species must learn their proper place. In the universe, Jake was locked into the metal restraints on the central platform. The metal was cold against his skin, and he could feel energy humming through it. Above his head, the plasma weapon was charging up with a sound like thunder building in the distance. Lights danced along its length, and the air around it began to shimmer with heat. But instead of feeling afraid, Jake found himself looking around with genuine interest. The acoustic properties of the chamber were remarkable, and he wondered how the Kethmari had calculated the angles to make sound carry so perfectly. The plasma weapon was clearly advanced technology, and he wished Amy could see the focusing array that concentrated the energy into a beam. Zixtel noticed that Jake was examining the room instead of cowering in fear. The alien leader's eyes flashed brighter, and he demanded to know if Jake had any final words before his execution. Most prisoners begged for mercy at this point or tried to bargain for their lives, but Jake just continued looking around with curiosity. Jake asked how long it had taken to build such an impressive chamber and whether the crystal walls were grown or carved. He wanted to know if the plasma weapon could be adjusted for different effects or if it only had one setting. He complimented the engineering and said his crew would find the technology fascinating. This was not going according to plan. Zixtel had expected Jake to break down and start talking about human defenses and colony locations. Instead, the human seemed more interested in the technical details of his own execution chamber. The alien leader decided to abandon the usual protocol and began shouting about Kethmari superiority. Zixtel ranted about how his species had conquered world after world, and how no military force in the galaxy could stand against them. He described battles where entire civilizations had surrendered without fighting once they saw the power of Kethmari technology. He waved all four arms dramatically, and his eyes flashed through the full spectrum of colors. The alien leader talked about how humans were just another weak species that would be crushed like all the others. He said their ships were primitive toys compared to Kethmari vessels, and their weapons were useless against superior armor and shields. He declared that humanity would be extinct within a year once the main fleet arrived at Earth. Jake listened to the entire speech with polite attention. Zixtel was clearly passionate about his subject, and the dramatic gestures were quite impressive. But as the alien continued ranting, something about the whole performance began to strike Jake as familiar. The way Zixtel bragged about being unbeatable and gestured wildly while describing his victories reminded Jake of something from home. It suddenly hit him what the situation reminded him of. His teenage nephew Danny used to act exactly like this. When he played video games online, Danny would yell at other players about how great he was and make dramatic threats while waving his controller around. The similarities were so perfect that Jake could almost hear Danny's voice saying the same kinds of things. The thought of his nephew acting tough while playing games in his bedroom made Jake smile. Then the smile turned into a small chuckle as he imagined Danny with 4 arms and glowing eyes, still making the same boastful speeches. The mental image was so ridiculous that Jake could not hold back a laugh. At first it was just a quiet chuckle that escaped from his chest, but once it started, Jake found he could not stop it. The laughter bubbled up from deep inside him as he realized the cosmic absurdity of his situation. Here he was, millions of miles from Earth, listening to an alien who sounded exactly like a teenager having a tantrum about losing a video game. The laughter grew stronger as Jake thought about how seriously Zixtel took himself. The alien leader was clearly expecting fear and respect, but instead was getting the same reaction that Danny got when he bragged too much. The whole situation was so unexpected and so perfectly ridiculous that Jake could not help but laugh harder. Effect on the Kethmari was immediate and shocking. Every alien in the chamber froze like they had been turned to stone. Their glowing eyes dimmed and flickered with confusion. The clicking sounds they made to each other became higher pitched and more frantic. Many of them stepped backward as if Jake's laughter was a physical force pushing them away. Zixtel stopped his speech in the middle of a sentence and stared at Jake with all his eyes wide. The alien leader's forearms dropped to his sides and his proud posture crumpled. He made a sound through his translator that came out as static and confused noise. No prisoner had ever responded to the execution ceremony with laughter. Jake's laughter echoed through the crystal chamber, amplified and reflected by the same acoustic technology that was supposed to carry the sounds of fear and pleading. Instead of terror, the chamber was filled with genuine human amusement. The sound bounced off the walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The plasma weapon above Jake's head stopped charging as the Kethmari operator became too confused to continue the procedure. Other aliens began backing toward the exits while making high-pitched clicking sounds that indicated panic. Some of the younger warriors had never experienced uncertainty before and did not know how to process what they were seeing. Jake tried to stop laughing, but every time he looked at Zixtel's shocked expression, it started again. The alien leader looked so much like Danny when someone laughed at his gaming boasts that Jake could not take the situation seriously anymore. He was still in danger, but the fear had been replaced by amusement at the unexpected comedy of first contact. The sound of Jake's laughter spreading through the Kethmari ship was like a virus that infected everything it touched. The crystal walls carried the sound through the communication systems and into every part of the vessel. In the detention area where the other humans were being held, Amy heard her captain's unmistakable laugh echoing through the corridors. Amy immediately understood what was happening and felt a wave of relief wash over her. If Jake was laughing, it meant he was still alive and still thinking clearly. She had been worried that the alien fear technology might break his mind, but laughter was proof that he was fighting back in his own way. Soon she was laughing too, not from fear or madness, but from the pure absurdity of their situation. Pete heard the laughter from his cell and recognized both Jake and Amy. He had been trying to figure out how to escape or at least disable some of the alien technology, but the sound of his friends laughing made him realize how ridiculous their predicament really was. Here they were, the first humans to meet aliens, and instead of a diplomatic meeting they were prisoners in what felt like a science fiction movie. Lisa and Carl began laughing when they heard the others. Soon all the human crew members were doubled over with mirth. Not because anything was particularly funny, but because laughter felt like the right response to such an impossible situation. They were scared and confused, but they were still alive, and still together in spirit, even though they were separated by walls. The Kethmari guards in the detention area did not know what to do. They had never heard prisoners laugh before, and the sound was more disturbing than screaming would have been. Fear they understood, anger they could handle, but laughter suggested that their captives were not taking the situation seriously. Some of the guards began clicking nervously to each other, and their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Back in the execution chamber, Zixtel was experiencing something completely outside his understanding. In all his years as a war commander, no prisoner had ever responded to the threat of death with amusement. The laughter suggested that either the human was insane or that he found Kethmari power somehow entertaining. Both possibilities were deeply unsettling. The alien leader tried to regain control by making the plasma weapon charge faster and increasing the fear frequencies in the room. But Jake's laughter only got stronger as the dramatic light show became more intense. To human eyes, the whole display looked like a very expensive special effects show. Impressive but not genuinely threatening because it was so obviously theatrical. Young Kethmari warriors who had never questioned their species methods began experiencing their first real doubts. If this small, soft creature could laugh at their most powerful weapons and their greatest war commander, what did that say about everything they had been taught? Some of them started making quiet clicking sounds that indicated confusion and distress. The laughter was having physical effects on the Kethmari as well. Their hard shells began developing tiny stress cracks, and their compound eyes started flickering erratically. The telepathic network they used to coordinate their actions became filled with anxiety and uncertainty. Several aliens near the back of the chamber quietly left to report the situation to higher authorities. Dr. Amy Chen had managed to strike up a conversation with one of her guards, a younger Kethmari named Kixalan who seemed less aggressive than the others. She explained that humans often laughed when they were nervous or when situations became too strange to process normally. Laughter was not an insult or a sign of disrespect, just a natural human response to absurdity. This explanation made Kixalan even more confused. The idea that intelligent beings would choose to laugh instead of showing proper fear was completely alien to Kethmari thinking. He asked Amy why humans would want to feel amused when they should be focused on survival. The question showed how fundamentally different the two species were in their approach to stress and danger. Amy tried to explain that laughter helped humans cope with difficult situations by reducing tension and helping them think more clearly. She said that fear could be useful for avoiding immediate danger, but too much fear made it hard to solve problems or find creative solutions. Humans had learned that keeping a sense of humor was often the best way to survive difficult times. The concept was so foreign to Kethmari culture that Kexalon had trouble even understanding the words. His species had built their entire civilization on the principle that fear was the proper response to superior power. The idea that any creature would choose happiness over submission challenged everything he believed about how the universe worked. Meanwhile, Ship Commander Vextal had been summoned to deal with the crisis. The ancient alien was older than anyone else on the ship and had participated in the conquest of dozens of worlds. He had seen every possible response to Kethmari power, from desperate fighting to immediate surrender, but he had never encountered a species that responded with laughter. Vextal arrived at the execution chamber just as Jake's laughter reached its peak. The old commander stood at the entrance and listened to the sound that was causing panic throughout his ship. His experience told him that this was not the laughter of madness or desperation, but genuine amusement. The human actually found their situation funny. The ship commander began to understand something that his younger warriors could not. This laughter represented a fundamental incompatibility between species. The Kethmari had built their empire on the assumption that all intelligent life would respond to fear and dominance in predictable ways. But these humans operated on completely different principles that made them immune to psychological warfare. As Vextal watched Jake continue laughing at Zixtal's increasingly frantic attempts to restore order, he realized that the Kethmari faced something more dangerous than any weapon. They faced a species that could not be controlled through intimidation because they found intimidation amusing rather than frightening. The old commander made a decision that surprised everyone in the chamber. He ordered the execution stopped, and told Zixtal to release the human immediately. When the war commander protested, Vextal explained that continuing the interrogation would only make the situation worse. The humans had already demonstrated that their fear-based methods were useless. Jake's laughter finally began to subside as he was released from the restraints. He wiped tears from his eyes and thanked Zixtal for the interesting demonstration of Kethmari technology. The alien leader just stared at him in complete bewilderment, still trying to understand how his most effective psychological weapons had been defeated by simple human amusement. Ship Commander Vextal called an emergency meeting with his senior officers in the command chamber of the Kethmari vessel. The ancient alien had seen many strange things in his long career, but never anything like what had happened in the execution chamber. The humans' laughter had created a crisis that threatened the very foundation of Kethmari society. The meeting included War Commander Zixtal, who was still shaken by his encounter with Jake, and several other high-ranking officers who had heard reports about the laughing prisoners. They gathered around a crystal table that glowed with soft light while Vextal explained the situation in terms that made everyone uncomfortable. He told them that the humans represented something completely outside Kethmari experience. Their laughter was not a sign of madness or bravery, but evidence that they operated according to principles that made fear-based control impossible. The humans seemed to find humor in situations that should inspire terror, which meant that standard conquest procedures would not work. Zixtel argued that they should simply kill all the humans and destroy their ship to eliminate the problem, but Vextel pointed out that this would not solve anything. If these humans could react this way, then other humans probably could too. Killing a few would not change the fundamental problem that an entire species seemed immune to their most important weapon. The ship commander made a decision that shocked his officers. He ordered the immediate release of all human prisoners and the repair of their ship. The Kethmari would provide them with improved life support systems, better navigation equipment, and a basic translation device. Then they would escort the humans back to the edge of their territory and send them on their way. When Zixtel asked why they were helping the very creatures who had humiliated them, Vextel explained his reasoning. The humans had shown no hostile intent and seemed genuinely interested in peaceful contact, but their psychological makeup was so different from anything the Kethmari understood that attempting to conquer them would be impossible and dangerous. The ancient commander had realized something that his younger officers missed. The humans' laughter was not just immune to their fear tactics, it was actually contagious. Already some of the younger Kethmari were beginning to question things they had never questioned before. If this influence spread, it could destroy the rigid hierarchy that held their society together. Jake was brought to meet with Vexel in a smaller chamber where the lighting was softer and less intimidating. The ship commander dismissed his guards and spoke to the human captain through a better translation device that carried more nuance in its voice. He wanted to understand these strange creatures before sending them away. Jake was still somewhat amused by the whole situation, but he tried to be diplomatic. He thanked Vextel for stopping the execution and asked if there was some way they could establish peaceful relations between their species. He explained that humans were naturally curious about other life forms and would be honored to learn about Kethmari culture and achievements. This offer of friendship seemed to make Vextel even more nervous. He explained that the Keth were warriors who maintained order through strength and fear. They had never had peaceful relations with other species because peace required equality and they only understood dominance. The human offer of friendship implied a relationship between equals, which was impossible for his people to accept. Jake tried to understand the alien perspective, but found it difficult. He asked why the Kethmari preferred conquest to cooperation, when working together usually produced better results for everyone involved. Surely they had problems that could be solved more easily with help from other species, who might have different ideas and approaches. The question revealed another fundamental difference between the species. Humans naturally thought in terms of mutual benefit and shared problem-solving, while Kethmari thought in terms of hierarchy and control. Vextel could not even imagine a relationship where both sides gained something without one being superior to the other. During their conversation, Jake's crew was being reunited with their repaired ship. Amy was fascinated by the Kethmari technology, and asked many questions about how their crystals grew and how their energy systems worked. Her innocent scientific curiosity continued to confuse the alien engineers, who were not used to being treated as teachers rather than conquerors. Pete was impressed by the efficiency of the repairs, and the improvements that had been made to their systems. The aliens had not just fixed the damage from capture but had actually upgraded several components with better materials and more advanced designs. He asked if this was normal procedure, but the Kethmari engineers just clicked nervously and said they were following orders. Lisa tried to establish communication protocols for future contact, but found that the aliens seemed eager to avoid any ongoing relationship. They provided a basic translation device and communication frequencies, but made it clear that they hoped never to encounter humans again. This confused her because first contact should have been a momentous occasion for both species. Carl was given updated star charts that showed Kethmari territory and clear warnings about which areas humans should avoid. The navigation data was incredibly detailed and would save Earth years of exploration time, but it came with strong suggestions that humans should stay in their own region of space and not venture into areas where other Kethmari ships might be patrolling. As the Terra Nova prepared to depart, Jake had one final conversation with young Kixelan, who had been assigned to escort them to the edge of Kethmari space. The young alien seemed different from the others, more thoughtful and less certain about his place in the universe. His encounter with Dr. Chen had left him with questions he had never thought to ask before. Kixelan asked Jake why humans chose to explore space if they were not looking for worlds to conquer. The concept of exploration for its own sake was difficult for him to understand. Jake explained that humans were driven by curiosity and the desire to learn new things, even when those things had no immediate practical value. The alien asked what humans did when they encountered something stronger than themselves. Jake said that humans usually tried to learn from it, understand it, and find ways to work with it rather than fight it. Sometimes the best response to superior force was not submission but cooperation and friendship. This conversation continued as they traveled to the border of Kethmari territory. Kixalan seemed hungry for new ideas and ways of thinking about the universe. He had never considered that there might be alternatives to the rigid hierarchy he had grown up with. The human concepts of cooperation and mutual respect were strange but appealing. When they reached the designated departure point, Vextal himself came to see the humans off. He made a formal speech through the translation device, wishing them safe travels and expressing hope that their paths would not cross again. But Jake could hear uncertainty in the alien's voice, as if he was not entirely sure he was making the right decision. Jake thanked the ship commander for his hospitality and assured him that humans had no aggressive intentions toward the Keth. He said that if they ever met again, he hoped it would be under better circumstances, where they could learn from each other as friends rather than as captor and prisoner. As the Terra Nova departed, Jake looked back at the massive Kethmari ship and wondered what effect their encounter would have on both species. He had no way of knowing that emergency messages were already being sent throughout the Kethmari fleet, warning all ships to avoid contact with the terrifying humans who could destroy their enemies with nothing more than laughter. The Terra Nova continued their mission of exploration, unaware that they had just prevented a potential invasion through the simple act of being themselves. Earth would eventually receive their reports about first contact with an advanced alien civilization, but the real story of how human laughter had defeated a galactic empire would take much longer to understand.